The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the polished marble floors of Buckingham Palace. Inside the private drawing room, King Charles III sat in his favorite chair, his fingers trembling slightly as they rested on the armrest. He had been rehearsing this moment for weeks, choosing every word carefully, imagining every possible outcome. But now that the time had arrived, his mouth felt dry and his heart pounded against his ribcage like a desperate prisoner. Across from him stood Eleanor Morrison, a woman whose presence seemed to fill the room without effort. She was not conventionally beautiful in the way magazines depicted royalty, but there was something about her that commanded attention. Her dark hair was pulled back simply, revealing a face marked by intelligence and quiet strength. She wore a modest blue dress, nothing fancy, nothing that screamed for notice. Yet King Charles could not take his eyes off her. They had met 6 months earlier at a charity event for underprivileged children. Charles had been making his rounds, shaking hands and offering rehearsed pleasantries when he encountered Eleanor. She ran a small non-profit organization that provided art therapy to children in foster care. When she spoke about her work, her eyes lit up with genuine passion. She did not treat him like a king. She treated him like a human being. That simple act had cracked something open inside him that he thought had sealed shut years ago. In the months that followed, they had met in secret. Private dinners arranged by trusted aides, walks through gardens far from prying eyes, conversations that stretched into the early morning hours. Charles found himself laughing again, really laughing, for the first time in longer than he could remember. Eleanor challenged him, questioned him, made him think about the world in ways he had not considered. She saw past the crown and the titles to the man underneath, lonely and tired and desperate for something real. But the weight of the crown was always there, heavy and unyielding. Charles knew that if he wanted Eleanor in his life permanently, there was only one way forward. The rules were ancient and inflexible. She would have to accept a role she never asked for, a life under constant scrutiny, a loss of privacy so complete it would feel like drowning. He had seen what it did to others. The pressure had broken stronger people than Eleanor. Still, he had to try. Love at his age felt like a miracle, and he was not willing to let it slip away without fighting for it. So he had arranged this meeting, this moment, using all the formality and procedure that his position demanded. His private secretary had drafted the proposal. Legal advisors had reviewed every detail. Royal protocol officers had planned the ceremony that would follow her acceptance. Everything was ready. Everything except Charles himself. Eleanor stood near the window, her back partially to him as she gazed out at the palace gardens. She had been unusually quiet since arriving, and Charles wondered if she already knew what was coming. She was perceptive that way, always reading the room, always 3 steps ahead in understanding people's intentions. "Eleanor," Charles began, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. "Thank you for coming today. I know the secrecy must have seemed odd." She turned to face him, and he saw something in her expression that made his stomach tighten. It was not excitement or curiosity. It was sadness, deep and profound, the kind that settles into a person's bones and changes them forever. "I think I know why I'm here," she said softly. Her voice carried across the room like a whisper in a cathedral. "Charles, before you say anything, I need to tell you something." He held up a hand gently. "Please let me speak first. I've been practicing this, and if I don't say it now, I might lose my courage." Eleanor nodded slowly and folded her hands in front of her, waiting. The gesture reminded Charles of a teacher patiently listening to a student who does not realize he is about to fail the test. "These past 6 months have been the happiest of my life," Charles said, standing up from his chair. His legs felt unsteady, but he forced himself to remain upright. "You've brought something into my world that I thought was lost forever. Joy, genuine companionship, a sense of purpose beyond duty and obligation. When I'm with you, I feel like myself. Not a king, not a symbol. Just a man who has found someone extraordinary." Eleanor's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she said nothing. She simply stood there, statue still, letting him continue. "I know what I'm about to ask is enormous," Charles went on, moving closer to her. "I know it will change your entire life. You'll lose your privacy, your freedom. The simple pleasures you enjoy now will become complicated by security and protocol. People will criticize you, judge you, dissect every word you say and every choice you make. It's a terrible burden, and I have no right to ask you to carry it." He paused, swallowing hard against the emotion threatening to choke him. "But I'm asking anyway. Because I love you, Eleanor. I love you more than I thought possible at this stage of my life, and I want to spend whatever time I have left on this earth by your side." From his pocket he withdrew a small velvet box. Inside was a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, a simple but elegant piece that he had always thought captured the essence of dignified beauty. He opened the box and held it out toward her. "I'm asking you to marry me," he said, his voice breaking slightly on the last word. "To become my wife. To stand beside me as queen consort. I know it's asking the world of you. But I'm asking anyway because I cannot imagine my future without you in it." The silence that followed felt like it lasted hours, though it was probably only seconds. Eleanor looked at the ring, then at Charles, then back at the ring. Her expression was unreadable, a carefully neutral mask that revealed nothing of the thoughts racing behind her eyes. Then she did something that would haunt Charles for the rest of his life. She reached out very gently and closed his hand around the ring box, pushing it back toward him with a tenderness that somehow made the rejection hurt even more. She said nothing. Not a single word. She simply shook her head slowly, once to the left and once to the right. A small, definitive gesture that carried the weight of finality. Charles felt the world tilt beneath his feet. The ring box felt impossibly heavy in Charles's hand, as if it had transformed from velvet and gold into solid lead. He stared at Eleanor, searching her face for some explanation, some hint of what was happening inside her mind. But she had turned away from him again, facing the window, her shoulders rigid with tension. "Eleanor," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Please say something, anything." She remained silent, her reflection in the glass revealing tears streaming down her cheeks. She was crying without making a sound, her body perfectly still except for the slight trembling of her hands. Charles had never felt more helpless in his entire life. He had commanded rooms full of world leaders.
He had given speeches to millions.
But in this moment, he could not find the words to bridge the distance between them. "Is it the pressure?" he asked desperately. "The public scrutiny? Because we can manage that. I have the best security team in the world. The best advisors. They can help you navigate everything. You won't be alone in this." Eleanor's reflection showed her closing her eyes, more tears spilling down her face. Still, she said nothing. The silence was like a living thing, growing larger and more oppressive with each passing second. Charles felt his chest tightening. His breathing became shallow and rapid. The room seemed to spin slightly, and he realized with distant alarm that he was not well. The stress of the moment was taking a physical toll, but he could not stop now. He had to understand. He had to know why. "Is it me?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Have I done something wrong? Have I misread everything between us? Because I thought we had something real, Eleanor. I thought you felt what I felt." Finally, she turned to face him. Her eyes were red and swollen, her face a portrait of anguish. When she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion but firm with conviction. "You haven't done anything wrong," she said quietly, "and you didn't misread anything. What we have is real, Charles. That's what makes this so impossibly hard." "Then why?" he asked, taking a step toward her. "If you love me, if this is real, then why won't you marry me?" Eleanor wiped at her tears with the back of her hand, a gesture so ordinary and human that it made Charles's heart ache. She looked at him with such sadness that he felt it like a physical blow. "Because I can't be what you need me to be," she said. "I can't be a queen. I can't live that life. And if I said yes and walked into that world, I would lose myself completely, and then I would lose you too, because the person you love would cease to exist." Charles shook his head vigorously. "That's not true. You're strong enough to handle it. I've seen your strength, the way you fight for those children, the way you stand up for what you believe in. You have everything it takes to be extraordinary in this role." "No," Eleanor said firmly. "You're not listening to me. It's not about strength. It's about who I am at my core. I'm not made for public life, Charles. I need quiet. I need privacy. I need to be able to walk down the street without cameras following me. I need to be able to fail without the whole world watching and judging. She moved closer to him, reaching out to touch his face with trembling fingers. I grew up in chaos, she said softly. My father was violent. My mother was an alcoholic. I spent my childhood walking on eggshells, never knowing when the next explosion would come. It took me years of therapy to build a life of peace and stability. The work I do with those children, it's not just a job. It's my purpose. It's how I survived my own childhood. Charles listened, his heart breaking with every word. He had known Eleanor had a difficult past, but she had never shared these details before. Now he understood why she needed control over her environment, why she valued her simple, private life so fiercely. If I became queen, Eleanor continued, tears flowing freely now, I would be thrust into exactly the kind of chaos I spent my whole life escaping. Every move I made would be scrutinized, every word analyzed. I would have no control over my own schedule, my own time, my own space. The press would dig into my past, expose my family's secrets, turn my trauma into tabloid headlines. I wouldn't survive it, Charles. I know myself well enough to know that. I would protect you, Charles said desperately. I would shield you from all of it. You can't, Eleanor replied, shaking her head. You're the king. You can't even protect yourself from it. How could you protect me? And more than that, why should you have to? Why should either of us have to live in a prison of protocol and pretense? She stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. When we're together in private, we're happy. We're real. We can just be two people who care about each other. But the moment I put on that ring, everything changes. I become public property. My life is no longer my own. And the woman you fell in love with, the one who makes you laugh and challenges you and sees you as just Charles, she disappears. She gets replaced by someone performing the role of queen, reading speeches written by others, wearing clothes chosen by stylists, living a life choreographed by protocol officers. It doesn't have to be that way, Charles protested weakly, though even as he said it, he knew she was right. The system was ancient and inflexible. He had tried to modernize it, to make it more human, but there were limits to what even a king could change. Yes, it does, Eleanor said gently, and you know it does. You've lived it your entire life. You've seen what it did to your mother, your father, your wives. The crown devours people, Charles. It takes their humanity and replaces it with duty and obligation. I can't let that happen to me. I won't. Charles felt his legs weakening. The room was definitely spinning now, and there was a pressure in his chest that frightened him. But he could not show weakness, not now. He had to make her understand. So what are you saying? He asked, though he already knew the answer. That we can never be together? That this is the end? Eleanor's face crumpled with grief. I'm saying that I love you too much to destroy us both by trying to fit into a life that will crush me. I'm saying that sometimes love isn't enough when the circumstances are impossible. The truth of her words hit Charles like a hammer. She was right. He had known it all along, somewhere deep inside, but he had allowed hope to blind him to reality. There was no compromise here. No middle ground. Either Eleanor accepted the crown and lost herself, or she walked away and they both lost everything. The silence between them stretched out like an ocean, vast and impossible to cross. Charles stood frozen, the ring box still clutched in his hand, feeling every one of his years weighing down on him. His vision blurred slightly at the edges, and he realized with detached concern that something was very wrong with his body. But his mind was still racing, still searching for some solution, some way to make this work. What if I abdicated? He said suddenly, the words tumbling out before he could think them through. What if I gave up the throne? We could live a normal life together. I could walk away from all of it. Eleanor's eyes widened in shock. Charles, no. You can't say things like that. You don't mean it. I do mean it, he insisted, though even as he spoke he could hear the hollowness in his own voice. I've spent my entire life preparing for this role, waiting for it, and now that I have it, I realize it's not what I want most. What I want most is you. A simple life. Real happiness. Why can't I choose that? Because you're the king, Eleanor said, her voice breaking. Because millions of people depend on you. Because you have a duty that goes beyond your personal desires. And because deep down, you know you could never actually walk away. The guilt would eat you alive. You'd resent me eventually, and I'd resent myself for letting you make that choice. Charles opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. She was right again. He knew she was right. The crown was not something he could simply remove like a hat. It was woven into his identity, his sense of purpose, his understanding of who he was in the world. Walking away would not free him. It would destroy him in a different way. Then we're trapped, he said quietly. Both of us. Trapped by circumstances neither of us chose. Yes, Eleanor whispered. We are. The unfairness of it all crashed over Charles like a wave. He had done everything right. He had honored his duty, served his country, sacrificed his own desires time and time again for the good of the monarchy. And this was his reward, to finally find love, real love, only to have it snatched away by the very system he had spent his life upholding. I'm tired, Eleanor, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm so tired of sacrificing everything for a role I never asked for. My whole life has been about duty and obligation. Can't I have this one thing? Can't I have you? Eleanor moved toward him, reaching out to take his hands in hers. Her touch was warm and grounding, and for a moment, Charles allowed himself to imagine a different world where they could simply be together, without all the complications. You have had me, she said softly. These past 6 months you've had all of me. Every honest conversation, every shared laugh, every quiet moment together. That was real. That was us. And no one can take those memories away. But it's not enough, Charles said desperately. I want more. I want a lifetime. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to grow old with you. Is that so terrible? Is it so wrong to want that? It's not wrong, Eleanor assured him, squeezing his hands gently. It's beautiful, but wanting something doesn't make it possible. And forcing something that isn't meant to be will only cause more pain in the long run. Charles felt tears burning in his eyes. He had not cried in years, decades perhaps. Kings did not cry. But right now he was not a king. He was just a man watching his last chance at happiness slip away, and he could not hold back the emotion anymore. How do you know it isn't meant to be? He asked, his voice thick with unshed tears. How can you be so certain? Maybe we're supposed to fight for this. Maybe love is supposed to be hard sometimes. Love can be hard, Eleanor agreed. But it shouldn't be destructive. And this would destroy us both, Charles. Maybe not right away, but eventually. You'd watch me struggle under the weight of expectations I could never meet. I'd watch you defend me, protect me, exhaust yourself trying to make an impossible situation work. The love between us would curdle into resentment and regret. Is that what you want? Is that the future you're asking me to accept? Charles closed his eyes, unable to bear the truth in her words. She was painting a picture he could see all too clearly, because he had witnessed it before. He had seen relationships crumble under the pressure of royal life. He had watched strong people break. Eleanor was right to protect herself. She was right to say no, but that knowledge did not make it hurt any less. I don't know how to let you go, he admitted, opening his eyes to look at her. I don't know how to go back to a life without you in it. You'll remember me, Eleanor said, tears streaming down her face now. And I'll remember you. And we'll both know that what we had was real and beautiful, even if it couldn't last. That has to be enough, Charles. Because it's all we can have. She released his hands and stepped back, creating physical distance to match the emotional chasm opening between them. Charles felt the loss of her touch like a physical wound. I should go, Eleanor said, her voice trembling. Staying longer will only make this harder. Wait, Charles said, panic flooding through him. Please, not yet. Just a few more minutes. But Eleanor was already moving toward the door, her movements quick and determined, as if she feared that staying even a second longer would break her resolve. She paused at the threshold, her hand on the door handle, and turned back to look at him one last time. I love you, Charles, she said simply. I need you to know that. I love you more than I've ever loved anyone. That's why I'm saying no, because I love you too much to hurt you by becoming someone I'm not. With that, she opened the door and walked through it, disappearing into the palace corridor beyond. Charles heard her footsteps echoing on the marble floors, growing fainter and fainter until they vanished entirely. He stood alone in the drawing room, the ring box still in his hand, feeling as if the floor had opened up beneath him. His chest was tight, his breathing labored, and the room was spinning more violently now. He knew he should call for help, should alert his staff that something was wrong, but he could not seem to make his body obey his mind. Instead, he sank back into his chair, clutching the ring box to his chest. The crown he had worn for so long suddenly felt impossibly heavy, pressing down on him with crushing weight. He had given everything to this role. Everything. And in return it had taken the one thing he wanted most. The darkness crept in at the edges of Charles's vision like curtains slowly closing. He tried to stand, tried to call out, but his body refused to cooperate. The pressure in his chest had become unbearable, radiating down his left arm in waves of pain that made his breath catch. Somewhere in the rational part of his mind, he recognized what was happening, but he felt strangely detached from it all, as if he were watching someone else's medical emergency unfold. The ring box slipped from his fingers and tumbled to the floor, landing with a soft thud on the Persian rug. Charles watched it fall, thinking absurdly that it seemed to fall in slow motion, spinning through the air like a leaf caught in an autumn breeze. His grandmother's ring, a symbol of love and commitment, now lying discarded on the floor. How fitting. His private secretary, James, found him minutes later. James had been waiting in the adjoining room, ready to escort Eleanor to the waiting car and then return to discuss the wedding arrangements. Instead, he had heard the sound of something falling, and Eleanor's hurried footsteps in the corridor, her face streaked with tears. Concerned, he had waited only a moment before entering the drawing room to check on the king. What he saw made his blood run cold. Charles was slumped in his chair, his face gray and covered in a sheen of sweat, one hand clutching at his chest. His eyes were open but unfocused, staring at nothing. "Your Majesty." James rushed forward, his training kicking in immediately. He pressed the emergency button concealed beneath the side table, alerting the palace medical team. Then he knelt beside Charles, checking his pulse, speaking in calm, reassuring tones even though his own heart was hammering with fear. "Help is coming, sir. Just hold on. Try to stay with me." Charles tried to speak, tried to explain what had happened, but the words would not form. His mouth opened and closed uselessly like a fish pulled from water. All he could think about was Eleanor walking away. The finality of that door closing, the sound of her footsteps fading into silence. His heart was breaking, and apparently his body had decided to break along with it. The medical team arrived within 90 seconds, their response time honed by years of protocol and preparation. They swarmed around Charles with professional efficiency, attaching monitors, administering medication, barking instructions to each other in clipped medical terminology. An oxygen mask was placed over his face. An IV line was inserted into his arm. Someone was checking his blood pressure while someone else was on the phone with the royal physicians. Through it all, Charles remained conscious but distant, watching the flurry of activity as if it were happening to someone else. He could see the concern on their faces, could hear the urgency in their voices, but it all seemed muted and far away. The only thing that felt real was the memory of Eleanor's tears, the gentle way she had pushed the ring box back into his hands, the devastating kindness of her rejection. Within minutes, the decision was made to transport him to the private hospital wing of the palace. A gurney appeared and careful hands lifted him onto it. As they wheeled him through the palace corridors, Charles caught glimpses of staff members pressing themselves against the walls, their faces pale with shock and worry. News of the king's collapse was already spreading through the building like wildfire. In the hospital wing, more tests were conducted. ECG readings were analyzed. Blood was drawn. Specialists were summoned. The head physician, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a woman who had served the royal family for 15 years, stood beside Charles's bed with a tablet showing his test results. "You've had a cardiac event, Your Majesty," she said gently but firmly. "Not a full heart attack, but something we call unstable angina. Your heart was not getting enough oxygen, likely triggered by extreme emotional stress combined with underlying coronary artery disease that we were not aware of." Charles closed his eyes, the irony not lost on him. His heart had literally given out under the strain of heartbreak. If the situation were not so terrifying, it might almost be poetic. "We need to keep you under observation for at least 48 hours, Dr. Mitchell continued. "We'll be running more tests to determine the extent of the blockage and decide on the best course of treatment. You may need cardiac catheterization, possibly even surgery. But the immediate crisis has passed. You're stable, stable." The word echoed in Charles's mind. His body might be stable, but nothing else in his life was. His private secretary appeared at the bedside, his expression carefully neutral in that way palace staff had perfected over centuries of serving royalty. "Sir, I need to know what to tell the press office." They're already receiving inquiries. Word has gotten out that an ambulance was seen entering the palace grounds. Charles opened his mouth to respond, then stopped. What was there to say? That the king had proposed marriage and been rejected, and his heart had quite literally broken from the pain. That scenario would create a media circus beyond anything the monarchy had ever seen. Eleanor would be hounded, her privacy destroyed, her past exposed to public scrutiny. She would become the woman who said no to the king, the woman blamed for his medical emergency. Her life would be ruined. Tell them I had a minor health scare, Charles said, his voice hoarse from the oxygen mask. Something routine, stress-related, nothing serious. I'll be back to my duties shortly. James nodded, making notes on his phone. And what about the other matter, sir? The proposal? What would you like me to do with the arrangements that were in place? Cancel everything, Charles said quietly. Quietly, discreetly. Make sure there's no paper trail, no record of any of it. As far as anyone knows, this meeting never happened. And Miss Morrison, sir? Should we maintain contact with her? Arrange future meetings? Charles felt his chest tighten again, and Dr. Mitchell glanced sharply at the monitors. No, he said firmly. No further contact. She's made her position clear. We respect her wishes and leave her in peace. The words tasted like ash in his mouth, but he forced them out. This was the right thing to do. The honorable thing. Eleanor had chosen her path, and he had to accept it, no matter how much it hurt. Over the next 24 hours, Charles lay in the hospital bed staring at the ceiling, while a parade of concerned family members, government officials, and advisors came and went. His sons visited, their faces tight with worry. The Prime Minister arrived to receive assurances that the king was recovering and would soon resume his duties. Palace staff moved quietly through the room, adjusting monitors, checking vitals, offering assistance he did not need. But through it all, Charles's mind was elsewhere. He kept replaying the scene in the drawing room, analyzing every word, every gesture, searching for some detail he had missed, some sign that Eleanor might change her mind. But deep down, he knew there was nothing to find. She had been clear. She had been honest. She had made the difficult choice to protect them both from a future of pain. On the second night, unable to sleep despite the medication, Charles asked James to bring him his laptop. Against the protests of the medical staff, he opened it and began to type. The laptop screen glowed in the dim hospital room, casting blue light across Charles's face as his fingers moved slowly across the keyboard. Writing had always helped him process difficult emotions, a habit he had developed decades ago when the pressures of royal life became overwhelming. Now he wrote not for publication or posterity, but simply to make sense of what had happened. Dear Eleanor, he typed, then stopped. How could he possibly put into words everything he was feeling? How could he explain the emptiness that had taken up residence in his chest, the way every breath felt like lifting a heavy stone? He deleted the greeting and started again. I write this not expecting you to read it, but because I need to say things I did not get the chance to say before my body decided to betray me with its timing. His fingers paused over the keys. Was this fair to her? Would sending such a letter place an unfair burden on her shoulders, make her feel responsible for his medical crisis? He backspaced through the entire sentence and tried once more. You were right about everything. I knew it even as I was arguing with you, but I was too desperate to admit it. The life I was offering you was not a gift. It was a cage. And you were brave enough to recognize that and walk away even though it hurt us both. The words flowed more easily now, as if a dam had broken inside him. He wrote about the 6 months they had shared, the conversations that had made him feel alive again, the way she challenged his assumptions and made him think differently about the world. He wrote about his regrets not for proposing, but for not seeing sooner how impossible the situation was. I spent my entire life believing that duty and personal happiness were incompatible, he wrote. I accepted that as the price of the crown. But meeting you made me hope, foolishly perhaps, that I could have both. You showed me what real happiness could feel like. And then you were wise enough to recognize that we could not sustain it within the confines of my role. I resent the truth of that, but I cannot deny it. He stopped typing and stared at the screen, reading back what he had written. It all sounded inadequate, insufficient to capture the magnitude of what he was feeling. How could words ever be enough to express the loss of a future he had briefly allowed himself to imagine? A future of simple mornings and quiet evenings, of shared laughter and comfortable silences, of growing old with someone who saw him as just a man rather than a symbol. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Dr. Mitchell entered, followed by a nurse carrying a tray of medication. She glanced at the laptop with mild disapproval. "Your Majesty, you should be resting, not working." "I'm not working," Charles replied. "I'm writing a letter that I will probably never send." Dr. Mitchell moved to check his vitals, her expression softening. "The person you proposed to," she said quietly, professional discretion evident in her careful phrasing. "They said no?" Charles nodded, surprised by her directness. Royal physicians usually maintained a studied neutrality about personal matters. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "Heartbreak is a real medical phenomenon. Broken heart syndrome, we call it. The emotional stress can literally affect heart function. What you experienced was partly cardiac disease, yes, but the emotional trigger was significant." "So my heart broke from heartbreak," Charles said with a bitter smile. "How poetically tragic." "It's more common than you might think," Dr. Mitchell said, noting his blood pressure reading on her tablet. "The heart and the mind are not as separate as we sometimes pretend. Strong emotions can have profound physical effects." After she left, Charles returned to his letter. He wrote about his understanding of Eleanor's decision, his respect for her self-awareness and courage. He wrote about his gratitude for the time they had shared, brief as it was. And finally, he wrote about his intention to let her go, to not contact her again, to allow her to return to the peaceful life she had built for herself. "I release you from any guilt you might feel about what happened to me," he typed. "My health crisis was not your fault. It was the culmination of years of stress and an underlying condition I was unaware of. You made the right choice for yourself, and I honor that choice. Please live your life fully without looking back. You deserve every happiness." He saved the document but did not send it. Perhaps he would send it someday, or perhaps it would remain unread in his private files. A testament to a love that could not survive the weight of a crown. The next morning, Charles was cleared to return to his private apartments. The cardiac catheterization had revealed a blockage that would require medication and lifestyle changes, but not immediate surgery. Dr. Mitchell prescribed rest, stress reduction, and a modified schedule of royal duties. The Prime Minister was briefed. A carefully worded statement was released to the press about the king's health scare and his expected full recovery. Life, it seemed, would return to normal. Except nothing felt normal anymore. In the weeks that followed, Charles threw himself into his work with an intensity that worried his staff. He took on additional engagements, extended his working hours, filled every moment of his day with meetings and responsibilities. If he was busy enough, if he exhausted himself completely, perhaps he would not lie awake at night thinking about Eleanor. It did not work. She haunted his thoughts constantly. He wondered what she was doing, if she was all right, if she ever thought about him. He resisted the urge to have his staff check on her, to send flowers or notes. He had promised to leave her in peace, and he would honor that promise no matter how much it cost him. Then, 6 weeks after the proposal, an envelope arrived at the palace. It was addressed to the king but marked personal and confidential. James brought it to Charles during his morning briefing, recognizing Eleanor's handwriting on the envelope. Charles stared at it for a long moment, his heart racing. Then, with trembling fingers, he opened it. The letter inside was handwritten on simple cream-colored paper, the kind Eleanor always used for her personal correspondence. Her handwriting was neat and careful, each word chosen with obvious deliberation. "Dear Charles," it began, "I heard about your health crisis. Please know that I never intended for my decision to cause you physical harm. The guilt I feel is overwhelming despite what you wrote in your letter." Charles's breath caught. She had received his letter somehow, though he had never sent it. Then he remembered his laptop had been connected to the palace cloud system. James must have found it and, in an act of loyalty that defied protocol, sent it to Eleanor. "I want you to understand something." The letter continued. "Walking away from you was the hardest thing I have ever done. Harder than leaving my abusive home as a teenager. Harder than rebuilding my life from nothing. Harder than any loss I have experienced. Because what we had was real and beautiful, and I wanted it so desperately." Charles read on, his eyes burning with unshed tears. "But wanting something and being able to survive it are two different things. You asked me to be honest with you, so I will be completely honest now. I am not strong enough for your world. I have spent too many years building protective walls around myself, creating a life where I feel safe and in control. Becoming queen would have demolished those walls, and I genuinely believe it would have destroyed me. Not because I am weak, but because I know my limits. The letter went on for several pages. Eleanor wrote about her childhood in detail, the violence she had witnessed, the chaos she had endured. She explained how her non-profit work with traumatized children was not just a career, but a mission born from her own survival. She described the panic attacks she still sometimes experienced, the therapy she continued to attend, the careful boundaries she maintained to protect her mental health. "You deserve someone who can stand beside you without breaking," she wrote. "Someone who can handle the pressure and scrutiny with grace. Someone whose past will not become ammunition for your critics. I am not that person, Charles. And pretending to be her would have been a disservice to both of us." Near the end of the letter, Eleanor's tone shifted slightly, becoming softer, more vulnerable. "I think about you every day. I wonder if you are well, if you are happy, if you have found peace with my decision. I hope you have. I hope you understand that I said no because I loved you, not because I did not love you enough. There is a difference, and it matters." The final paragraph made Charles close his eyes against the pain. "I will not contact you again after this letter. It would not be fair to either of us to maintain a connection that can only cause pain. But I want you to know that you changed my life. You showed me that I am capable of loving someone completely, something I had doubted after my childhood. You gave me 6 months of genuine happiness. That is a gift I will carry with me always. Please take care of yourself. Please find joy where you can. Please know that somewhere in this world there is a woman who loves you exactly as you are, crown and all." "With all my heart, Eleanor." Charles sat in silence for a long time after reading the letter, holding the pages gently as if they were precious artifacts. He read it again and then a third time, absorbing every word, every sentiment, every painful truth she had shared. Finally, he folded the letter carefully and placed it in the locked drawer of his desk where he kept his most private documents. Then he sat down and wrote his own response, knowing even as he wrote it that he would not send it. Some Conversations Co. 2 years passed with the steady, relentless march of time that waits for no one, not even kings. Charles settled into his role with a quiet dedication that impressed even his harshest critics. He championed causes close to his heart, spoke eloquently about climate change and social justice, and worked tirelessly to modernize the monarchy without stripping it of its essential dignity. The health scare had forced him to slow down, to delegate more, to take better care of himself. In some ways, it had been a blessing disguised as a crisis, but Eleanor was never far from his thoughts. He did not seek information about her, did not ask his staff to monitor her activities, but occasionally news would reach him through indirect channels. He heard that her nonprofit had expanded, opening 2 new centers for traumatized children. He learned that she had given a TED Talk about childhood trauma and resilience that had gone viral, touching millions of people around the world. Each piece of news brought him a mixture of pride and melancholy. She was thriving just as she needed to, in a life that had no room for him. One autumn afternoon, Charles was working in his study when James entered with an unusual expression on his face, something between concern and curiosity. "Your Majesty, there is someone here to see you. She does not have an appointment, but she insists it is important. She says you know her." Charles looked up from his papers, his heart skipping inexplicably. "Who is it?" "Eleanor Morrison, sir." The room seemed to tilt slightly, just as it had that day 2 years ago. Charles set down his pen carefully, took a steadying breath, and nodded. "Send her in." He stood as Eleanor entered, and for a moment they simply looked at each other across the expanse of the study. She looked different, he thought. Her hair was shorter, cut in a style that framed her face. She wore a dark green dress and a coat against the autumn chill, but her eyes were the same, warm and intelligent and carrying depths of emotion he remembered all too well. "Hello, Charles," she said softly. "Eleanor." His voice came out steadier than he felt. "This is unexpected, I know. I am sorry for arriving unannounced. I almost turned back a dozen times on the drive here. But there is something I need to tell you, and I could not do it in a letter." Charles gestured to the chairs by the fireplace, and they sat, maintaining a careful distance between them. The silence stretched out, neither quite knowing how to begin. "I heard you have been well," Eleanor finally said. "Your health has improved." "Yes. The doctors have me on a strict regimen. No more late nights, better diet, regular exercise. I have become quite boring, actually." A small smile touched her lips. I doubt you could ever be boring. Another pause. Charles waited, sensing that Eleanor needed to proceed at her own pace. I have been seeing someone, she said abruptly, and Charles felt his chest tighten despite himself. A therapist, I mean. A new one. Someone who specializes in trauma and complex family systems. We have been doing intensive work together, addressing things I have spent years avoiding. That sounds difficult, Charles said carefully. It has been. Excruciating sometimes, but necessary. Eleanor clasped her hands in her lap, a gesture he recognized as something she did when anxious. One of the things we have been exploring is my fear of chaos and my need for control. We traced it back to my childhood as expected, but also examined how it has limited my life in ways I did not recognize. Charles listened, unsure where this was leading but afraid to interrupt. I have been so focused on protecting myself, Eleanor continued, that I have built a life that is safe but small. I work with children who have been through trauma, helping them heal. But I realized I have been living as if I am still that traumatized child myself. I never allowed myself to fully grow beyond it. She looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. When I walked away from you, I told myself it was self-preservation. And it was, partly. But it was also fear. Fear of the unknown. Fear of losing control. Fear of being hurt. I was so busy protecting myself that I did not stop to consider whether I was also limiting myself. Eleanor, Charles began, but she held up a hand. Please, let me finish. I need to say this. She took a deep breath. I have spent 2 years wondering if I made the right choice. 2 years watching you from a distance, reading about your work, seeing how you have grown into your role. 2 years missing you so deeply that sometimes I could not breathe from the weight of it. Charles felt his heart hammering against his ribs. I have missed you too. Every day. I know, Eleanor said softly. I could see it in your face in photographs, hear it in your speeches when you talked about duty and sacrifice. We were both grieving what we lost. She leaned forward slightly, her expression intense. But here is what I have learned in therapy. Sometimes the thing we think will destroy us is actually the thing that will help us grow. Sometimes safety is another word for stagnation. And sometimes love is worth the risk, even when the risk is enormous. Charles felt hope flickering to life in his chest, dangerous and terrifying. What are you saying?
I am saying that I was wrong.
Not about everything. You were asking me to step into a role I was not ready for, and I was right to recognize that. But I was wrong to think that meant we had no future together. I was wrong to believe that I could not grow and change and become strong enough to handle the challenges. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder, placing it on the table between them. I have been working with a team of specialists. Therapists, yes, but also media consultants, protocol advisors, people who understand the pressures of public life. I have been preparing myself not to become someone I am not, but to develop the skills and resilience I would need to navigate your world without losing myself. Charles stared at the folder, almost afraid to touch it. Why would you do that? Because I love you, Eleanor said simply. Because walking away from you was the right decision at the time, but it does not have to be the permanent decision. Because people can grow and change and become capable of things they once thought impossible. She opened the folder, revealing documents and reports. This is a comprehensive plan. Therapy records showing my progress. A media strategy that protects my privacy, while acknowledging public interest. A role design that allows me to continue my nonprofit work, while taking on limited royal duties. Boundaries and safeguards to protect my mental health. A transition timeline that gives me time to adjust gradually, rather than being thrown into the deep end. Charles picked up the documents with shaking hands, scanning through them. The level of detail was astounding. She had thought of everything, anticipated every challenge, developed solutions to problems he had not even considered. I am not the same woman who walked away 2 years ago, Eleanor said quietly. I have done the work to heal old wounds, to build new strengths, to become someone who can stand in the spotlight without shattering. I cannot promise I will be perfect. I cannot promise I will never struggle. But I can promise that I am ready to try. She reached across the space between them and took his hand, her touch sending electricity through his entire body. If you will still have me, if the offer is still open, if you have not moved on and found someone else to share your life with. Charles looked down at their joined hands, then up at her face, seeing the vulnerability there, the courage it took to come here and risk rejection after 2 years of silence. She had done exactly what she said. She had grown, She had changed. She had become someone new while still remaining essentially herself. The offer was never closed, he said, his voice thick with emotion. My heart has been waiting for you, Eleanor. It never stopped waiting. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Are you certain? Because if we do this, we do it properly. No secrets, no rushing, no pretending the challenges do not exist. We take it slow. We build something real and sustainable. We protect what we have while acknowledging what we are stepping into. Charles stood, pulling her up with him, and wrapped his arms around her. She fit against him perfectly, just as she had 2 years ago, and he felt something inside him that had been broken begin to mend. I am certain, he whispered into her hair. I have never been more certain of anything in my life. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other. Two people who had found their way back to each other through pain and growth, and the kind of love that refuses to die, even when circumstances seem impossible. When they finally pulled apart, Charles kept hold of her hands. We do this your way, he said firmly, slowly, carefully, with all the support and boundaries you need. I will not make the same mistake twice. I will not ask you to sacrifice yourself for me. And I will not run away when things get difficult, Eleanor replied. I have learned that courage is not the absence of fear. It is moving forward despite the fear. I am still afraid, Charles. Terrified, actually. But I am not letting fear make my decisions anymore. They spent the rest of the afternoon talking, really talking, about everything that had happened in the 2 years they had been apart. Charles told her about the dark months after his health crisis, the slow process of healing both physically and emotionally. Eleanor shared details of her therapy journey, the painful excavation of old trauma, the gradual building of new resilience. As the sun began to set, casting golden light through the study windows, they made plans. A private dinner the following week. Meeting with Alea,